beer MBA classes, or my IUPUI classes, or they are experienced judges already. So that makes this a completely different type of study group than what I've done in the past, because we're not going to cover every style and talk about it as I have done in other classes, because everyone here has already done that. What's important now for the new exam structure is judging practice. It's a very different exam. The legacy exam, the previous exam, was mostly about the written information. You had 10 essay questions, and you fill out those questions, spend most of your time on that, and you judge 4 beers as part of the process. Okay, 70% of your score was the essay. 30% of your score was those 4 beers. The new structure of the exam is weighted 50-50, and there's 6 beers to judge. And the online entrance exam is what you take in order to take that tasting exam. So we're going to study enough to try to get you through that online entrance exam. That's the technical information. That replaces the written information on the old test. You get a score out of that. More than anything, you get a pass-fail. If you pass with at least a 60, then you can take the tasting exam. You're not a judge yet until you take the tasting exam. The tasting exam then determines your rank. Okay? So judging is really, really important now. It's always been important, but weighted 50-50, 6 beers, and your whole rank, pretty much depending on it, it's much more about judging, so we need a lot more judging practice for the new exam structure. So that's what we're going to do. So we're still going to cover lots of beer styles, but rather than sample it and talk about it and read the guidelines and taste it, we're going to judge those styles. Okay? Not every style, but we're going to judge lots of beer. That way we're going to get used to writing score sheets and judging beers blindly and that sort of thing. All right? We'll cover tonight a couple tech topics, water and malting. We'll cover some off flavors and flavors a little bit. All of this should be reviewed to some degree. And then we'll get into some beer styles. We'll talk about each beer style, but then, we'll talk about a few and then we'll judge some. We'll talk about a few and then we'll judge some. All right. So the exam structure, you can look over this document. It's kind of confusing if you go online and start plundering around, because there's a lot of redundancy. There's a lot of different files on the BJCP.org site now. So I've tried to pare it down and just give you guys what you need. This file right here, online, it's called BJCP exam structure. And this basically talks about the difference between the legacy exam and the new exam. For almost all of you, you're starting from, actually everybody's starting from scratch. Everybody's starting from scratch. So you got to take the online entrance exam. You have to get at least a 60 out of that, and then from then you can take the tasting exam. Page 2, or the first page, sorry, there's no page numbers on it. Existing non-apprentice BJCP judges kind of tells you what you have to do if you already have a rank and you want to move up. The online exam, the entrance exam, has anybody taken that yet? Just for fun or anything? Okay. It's $10 to take that. It's an online exam, as I said. I've got another sheet here that we can pass out. I'll keep one, take one, pass those around. This is a step-by-step. Apparently there's a little confusion once you get into the online portal to try to take the exam. So this is a step-by-step visual guide to how to get registered for the exam. Okay, so apparently this is pretty handy. So keep that around. The online exam is a 200 question exam. 200 questions, a mixture of true, false, multiple choice, single answer, multiple choice, multiple answer. Some you may answer one of 4 or 5 things, and others it may be all 5 of those multiple choice. And then there's true, false. So 200 questions. I think there's about 2,000 questions in the pool, and then you randomly get 200 of those, and you have to answer those 200 questions in 60 minutes. So it's not a Google exam, right? Yes, it's open book, but do you really have time to look stuff up if you're trying to answer faster? I mean, you're trying to do, what's the math on that? So we got a calculator.
3.3 questions a minute or so.
3 questions a minute. 3.3 questions a minute. Very good.
I use my calculator.
Okay. That's a lot, man. You're rifling through them. So you got 20 seconds, roughly, 15 to 20 seconds to think about one. Now, with the old legacy exam, I preached time management because it was so critical. You had, X number of minutes to take the exam. You had so many questions. You had like 14 minutes per question. People would always get messed up on it. Every study group I've taught, I would say, it doesn't matter how many times I try to preach this and bang this into your head, I guarantee at least one person out of this class is going to screw it up, and you're going to mess up the whole time management thing. And they would, if not 2 people. You get a little nervous, you get anxietous, next thing you know, you're spending 20 minutes on a question instead of that 14 that you were allotted, and your whole test is screwed up. Well, this is similar. You got 20 seconds. You got 15 to 20 seconds per question. If you spend 3 minutes thinking about one, and doing some math, and oh yeah, this, or looking something up, I mean, holy cow, that's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's maybe 7 questions you're not even going to get to, right? So time management is critical. You've got to keep moving. You've got to keep moving on this online test, or you will not get through it. I've talked to people who've taken the online test, and I've seen sample questions, and it is hard. They're tough questions. I mean, they've done their homework, and they've tried to make it comparable to the legacy exam, which was the big, long written essay exam. But it's in these short questions now, but those short questions they're tough ones.
Is there like any sample practice exams out there? So you can
Yes, there is. There is. If you go to this course website right here, there is a 20-question sample exam that you can take. So you can take that at any time. You can take the other exam at any time, but they kind of request that you be prepared. Don't waste too much of your own time and money, that sort of thing. But you can take it over and over. After at least a 1-day wait, they must pay an additional $10 fee each time they retake. So it's $10 every time you take it, but you can take it every day until you pass it. So best to be prepared and then dive into it. In one of the documents I have here, there's a couple examples of the questions, but you can take the sample test, which is a 20-question sample test, and that will get you through it as well. The beer judging examination consists of completing score sheets for 6 beers served at 15-minute intervals. So that's pretty good. I mean, 15 minutes to fill out a score sheet, that's pretty good. You should be, when you're in a competition format, you should be doing that in 7 minutes, 6 to 7 minutes, giving you a few minutes to talk about it so that you're completely done in 10 minutes and moving on to the next beer. So 15 minutes to do a really thorough analysis and write-up is pretty generous, actually. Depending on your score coming out of the judging exam, then you can become a recognized or certified judge. Once you get a certain number of points and have an 80 on that test combined with your online test, then you can proceed, if you wish, to the essay exam. It's different than the old one. It has a few less questions on it, but you can continue to that, and it's an essay exam similar to what we've had in the past. And that exam will get you into the national and master ranks now. Okay. Whole goal of this is that it currently takes about 3.5 hours on average to grade an exam, the legacy exam. That 10-question essay, 3.5 hours per. So you get a stack of 10 or 12 exams. Like say this room full of, this exam of 12 people. That goes out to a grader like Sandy or Agatha, a couple local people that are doing that. That's a 40 to 50 hour commitment to grade that. And that's volunteer effort. And you have to be a national or higher judge to do it. So you see the problem. The BJCP is getting more popular, more people want to get in it, more people want to get certified. You got this exam that takes 3.5 hours per to grade, and just running out of people. We're running right now about a year to get scores back. So once the backlog gets worked through, then I think they'll start opening up the exam more, but right now it's limited to 12. There's only so many exams per month in the world that can be given. Because even with the judging exam, it still takes people to grade that. You can't put that into a machine. The online exam, which is that entrance exam, that's good because that's going to save people a lot of time. A lot of people that take the test aren't ready. That's going to weed them out. So then you come in, prove, if you can pass that on your own time, then you're going to come in and really prove yourself with the tasting exam. So it's good structure, and it's going to really cut down on judging time. In this document, there is information about that written exam. If you want to read about that, anyway, you can read all this stuff over a little bit on your own, but I'm trying to hit the highlights of what you need to do. So you've got your instruction sheet here, you've got the exam structure, got a little bit more information about the entrance exam here. Should just be a reiteration of what we've already talked about. Next steps upon passing, you immediately are told whether you passed or not, and you're told where you need to work if you didn't pass. If you did pass, then it gives you basically an email confirmation that says you passed it. Now we're on sort of a tight timeline with the way we're doing this exam. So we've got 4 or 5 weeks of study or whatever it is, and then you got a week or so to dive in and pass that online test so you can take the tasting exam. Okay? Everyone understand that? You've got to pass that online test before you can take the tasting exam. So as you pass it, and it gives you that confirmation, and you can print that out, and that's basically your ticket to get in to take the test. And I'll have to set some sort of deadline on that so that if you don't pass, hopefully everyone here does, but if you don't, there's people all over the country clamoring to get into these exams. I mentioned the online schools, okay? Those people are putting out a lot of people, but they don't do exams. So most of in the past, exams were done mostly from study groups. You'd hold a study group, then you'd have an exam. Now you've got these online schools that are just teaching the material and then throwing the people out there to find an exam to take. And there isn't one, because every exam is usually tied with a study group. So the people come, just like you guys, get priority in the exam here, and then there might be a couple spots that open up. I've already got those filled with local people, but I've got people contacting me from New York and stuff, willing to come in to take the test. So we'll have to set some sort of deadline so that we do know in advance, so I can let people know that I've got a couple seats available if someone wants to come in and take them. I've got a big long wait list. Okay? Any questions on that process?
So then you would recommend, like, for the pass the entrance exam, maybe to allow some like leeway, so in case we don't pass that first time, we have enough time to find the table.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. You want to be able to take it. You may have to take it a few days. Who knows? Hopefully you're prepared and you can take it the first time. Like I used to tell people for the other test, when you had to, write all the stuff down about the beer styles. It's like if it's a critical component, a critical parameter for a style, you should probably know it. You should know how big a Doppelbock is. You should know the IBUs of an American Pale Ale that's hop focused, an IPA. Those are parameters that are just sort of quintessential to the style. Their tied so closely to it. You should know those. Outside of that, average beers and stuff, most of those you can guess on, to be honest. What I wanted you to see on this one is page 25. And there's a few examples. So Dusseldorf Alt Beer typically has a light body and a medium carbonation level. True or false? I think the body of an alt beer is more medium.
I think it's more medium. It might be medium.
And when I drink them in Dusseldorf, carbonation's rather low.
Yes.
So I would think it'd be more little low to medium carbonation, a little more medium body. It's got a nice, rich German maltiness to it. So that alone should tell you, it's not a light body beer. So that would be false. Which of the following characteristics is inappropriate for a Southern English brown ale? And this is a multiple choice single answer. Multiple choice single answer. So what would be inappropriate for a Southern English brown? Rich malty sweetness, should have that. Notes of plums and raisins, should have that. Well, can't have that. The one I've had was licoricey and dark fruit and all kinds of stuff. Medium body, probably. I mean, they're actually pretty full body from what I recall. Moderate hop aroma, maybe not. Maybe that doesn't sound right. And low carbonation. It's an English ale. It should be fairly low, very low to no hop aroma, right? So moderate hop aroma is the one that doesn't match there. A Doppelbock typically has more caramel, and this is a single answer, again, single answer. A Doppelbock typically has more caramel character than traditional bock. Probably true. More hop aroma than traditional bock. Not sure about that one. More melanoidin character than traditional bock. Absolutely. More astringency than traditional bock. What? More diacetyl than traditional bock. A Doppelbock typically has more caramel character than traditional bock, more hop aroma than traditional bock, more melanoidin character than traditional bock, more astringency, that one's out of line, diacetyl's out of line. Gotta be melanoidin. We always talk about melanoidins with Doppelbocks. We don't talk about caramel character, which is what I thought was kind of odd there, because Doppelbocks are not known for a crystal malt. German beers rarely use crystal malt. It comes from decoction mashing, all these things, that we tend to talk about. So caramel is usually not something you talk about, nor is hop character in a bock. So more melanoidin character than traditional bock. But see how that one kind of tripped you up. Multiple choice, multiple answer example. Check all that apply. Acetic acid is perceived as having which of the following characteristics? Is it papery? No, that's oxidation. Is it sherry? No, that's oxidation. Is it vinegar? Yes, acetic acid is vinegar. Is it sour? Yes. types of sourness, lactic and acetic, right? So yes, it's sour. Vinous?
No idea what it is.
No,
I think it's,
I don't think vinous.
you know, I just wonder, is it like a copy, kind of a copy?
Vinous?
What is
Wine
vinous?
like.
Wine-like.
Is it wine?
Yeah. Sometimes oxidation creates a wine-like character. Sometimes malt can create that, but it's usually more of an off flavor, more of an oxidized off character. Although Flanders reds sometimes have a red wine-like character
So
in a good way.
like a tannin oak, tannin that comes off the oak, or tannin that come off.
That's part of it.
Okay.
In a Flanders, that's part of it. It tastes vinegary and sour, it wouldn't taste wine-like. It would taste bad wine-like, but it wouldn't be wine-like. As you can see from these examples, they're tough questions. We talked about each one of these for a minute, and you had 15 seconds to answer these. So you have to study. You do
And read
have to
very
study
carefully.
for this test. This one doesn't have a tremendous amount of information in it. I printed probably more than I needed to here. But on page 6 is probably where you need to start reading about this, because one of the questions that was always on the legacy exam was, do you understand what the BJCP is and how it ranks, how you achieve certain ranks and how you could earn points and all those types of things. So I guarantee you're going to have questions on the online exam about the BJCP. So you need to know your ranks. You need to know what it takes to get those different ranks. You still need to know that below 60 you're an apprentice. So if your composite score between the online test and if you don't get a 60 on the online test, you don't get to take the tasting. But you're not an apprentice either. Okay? So you have to get at least a 60 on the online test to get your ticket to take the tasting exam. Then if you get at least a 60 on the tasting exam, below 60 on the tasting exam, then you're an apprentice. So you pass the online test with a 60 or better. You took the tasting exam but didn't get a 60, you're not in the program yet. Well, you are in the program, but you're an apprentice. If you get 60 to 70, you're recognized. 70 to 80, you're certified. After that, now you have to take the essay exam, the written exam they call it now. You have to have an 80 on the tasting exam and 20 points, and then you can take the written exam. And then if you take the written exam and score an 80 on it, then your composite score has to be above 80 total. Then you become national. Over 90, you get into the master rank, and then you got to start looking at the experience points. It takes no experience points for recognized, 5 experience points to be certified, 20 to be national, 40 to be master, 100 to be grandmaster, and then levels of grandmaster. It's an extra 100 points, experience points per level that you achieve.
So say we pass the online, we get a 70 on the judging, but we don't have the 5 experience points. Do we then get certified once we accumulate those 5?
Yes.
Okay.
You would be recognized, and then as you get your points, you would move up.
But you don't have to get the points before you
Correct.
get that score. Okay.
Right. Read this document, understand the basics of the ranks and how you achieve them, and what it takes to get to each one. You'll have to know that for the exam. You should know what honorary master and honorary grandmaster is as well, and know that you normally get 1 point per competition day. Usually get a half point per flight. Usually have 2 flights. So if you have a morning flight and an afternoon flight, you get a half point for each, 1 point for a day. So it takes a while to rack up 20 points. Back to the main handout. BJCP exam, some general notes about it. A lot of people wonder why it's a timed exam. And it honks people off. You know, why do I have to know all this stuff? Why does it have to be at the top of my head? When I'm judging in the competition, I've got the guidelines sitting right there next to me. So, you know, why do I have to memorize all this stuff? There's no way to be a good judge if you're constantly relying on the guidelines. You have to know the styles or you're going to slow the competition down way too much. You can't judge a beer in 7 minutes if you have to stop and read the guidelines, right? Just think about it. You can't read through the whole guidelines and then judge the beer in 7 minutes. The only thing the guidelines should be there for is a quick reference if there's something you can't think of off the top of your head, or to verify something, quick reminders, things like that. That's the only reason why you should be referring to the guidelines. Other than that, you should know enough about those styles that you can judge those at a good pace. Beyond that, once you get into higher ranks and you start judging many best of shows and things like that, you know, you can be judging many best of show. Let's say, you know, at a competition, most of you maybe are familiar with competitions. Well, let's say you got 3 flights of stouts. You got 6 different styles of stouts, right? So you got 3 different flights, and this one pushes 3, and that one pushes 2, and they push 1. You end up with 5, 6, 7 stouts. They may be all different types. And you got to sit down with no guidelines, basically, and just determine which one is the better of the style. And again, if you're trying to refer to the guidelines, you just don't know the information well enough, and it's going to slow everything down. You're not going to be as efficient as a judge. Beyond that, you get into best of shows, and then it gets even harder. I've talked about how long it should take. Page 3, I left this stuff in there. This was from my previous handouts. These were the types of questions that you had on the older essay exam, but I went ahead and left them in here just so you can look at them, because if you had to know them for the essay exam, you have to know them now. This is the same information you have to know. It's just it's been put into short questions with, you know, the multiple choice or true false answers, but you got to know the same information. So some of the old stuff, you had to know. Old question 1, you had to know about the BJCP, and you had to know about judging competition procedures, which is further in this handout, judging competition procedures. Styles questions, basically where you would be given 3 styles, and for that style you have to be able to, for each one of those 3 styles, you have to be able to write down the aroma, the flavor, the mouthfeel, descriptions for each one of those styles, as well as say something unique about each style, right? Be it ingredients or brewing processes or something like that, as well as name a commercial example. So you got to be able to do that for every single style. There's 74 styles in the guidelines. You have to be able to rattle off, or at least get close, on aroma, appearance, flavor, mouthfeel, unique aspect, and commercial example. Every one. There were some style-related questions where it would ask you a question like, identify 3 top fermenting beer styles where the minimum original gravity is 1070. Top fermenting ales, gravity above 1070, original gravity. So you weren't even given the styles. You had to go by that and then go, okay, what's 3 styles that meet that criteria? Write those 3 styles down, then do the full analysis of each style, right? So guarantee you those types of questions are going to be on the online entrance exam. So no beers of, you know, that are greater than 1070. Other questions that went along, and I've got some answers in there, by the way, on the next page, like a strong Scotch ale, Imperial Stout, Imperial IPA, Belgian triple, dark strong, English or American barley wine. But these are just my opinions. I don't remember ever looking them up, so they may even be wrong. You should double check them. Double checking them will also make you learn them. Identify 3 distinctly different German bottom fermented beer styles. Okay. Identify 3 distinctly different beer styles that contain wheat as 25% or more of the grist. You should know those styles. Identify 3 distinctly different Belgian beer styles. Identify 3 top fermenting beer styles where the maximum original gravity does not exceed 1040. Right? Standard ordinary bitters, small Scottish ales, Berliner Weiss. Again, I've got some answers in there. The old famous cities question. Guarantee you, you're going to have to know these on the online exam as well. For famous cities question, it would give you 3 locations. You would have to know from the location what beer style they're talking about. Okay. Then from that, so it would give you, Cologne and Dusseldorf and Dublin or something. I don't know. Yeah, Vienna. How about that? Dublin. That's on there. Bamberg. What beer's from Bamberg? Rock beer. Smoke beer. What beer's from Berlin? Berliner Weiss, right? Burton-on-Trent. Think of Burtonizing the water.
It's not shit pilsners.
No, that's your English beers. Burton-on-Trent. Dublin,
Dry Irish.
Dusseldorf, malt beer. Edinburgh,
Scottish.
Scottish. Einbeck. Exactly.
Yeah.
Remember, I've said that. The ER on the end means it's from wherever. So Einbecker is a brand, which means it's from Einbeck. And what beers are
I
they?
don't remember. I just remember
It's
the
good.
Steinbecker.
You're right there. Traditional Bach. Traditional Bach. Not Doppelbock. Doppelbock's a Munich thing. But Einbeck is where traditional Bach originated. Cologne or Cologne. Kolsch. Newcastle. Which kind? Northern. Northern Newcastle, Sweet Southern. Everybody say that. Northern Newcastle, Sweet Southern. Right? That's how you remember your north and your south. San Francisco. California Common. Technical name for it, California Common. Centre Valley. Centre Valley. It's near Brussels.
Oh.
Lambic. And Vienna. It's a tough one. Vienna lagers. Yes, that's right. Vienna lagers. After identifying the style, then you would do the usual explanation of each of those. So know those cities. Know those 12 cities because they will pop up. We used to have to know them, and I'm sure you'll have to know them again.
Was it always the same 12?
It's always those 12. Those are the 12 famous cities. So I doubt that gets changed. Old classic example score sheet. This one, they can't replicate this one. This was a newer question. It was pretty cool. It was basically you were given a score sheet and then told that you were judging a classic example of an ESB. And you had to fill out the score sheet as though you were judging a classic example of an ESB. That was kind of a cool question. But that one obviously won't be on there. Troubleshooting questions. These are the key off flavors you need to know. Cloudiness, buttery, low head retention, astringency, phenolic, light body, fruitiness, sourness, cooked corn, bitterness, cardboard, sherry-like, acetaldehyde, and alcoholic. And what's always going to trip you up on those is it would give you 3 of that 12 or however many there are there. That question, it would always give you 3. So you get a random 3 from that, and it would say, explain it, what causes it, how to get rid of it, etc. So know all about it. And then also, is it ever appropriate? And if so, where and when? Right?
Like which beers? Is
Yes.
appropriate in?
Yes. Is it appropriate? Is sourness ever appropriate? Is lactic sourness ever appropriate? To be more specific. So first off, let's say sourness. That's a broad one, man. That's a broad one. So you have to explain, well, there's acetic sourness and there's lactic sourness, right? And they can be caused by lactobacillus, bacterial contamination, Pediococcus can cause acetic. When are they appropriate? Is acetic, vinegary sourness ever appropriate in any beer? Careful, trick question. All of you should know this. It's one style. Flanders. Flanders red has an acetic, vinegary sourness. Not so much in a brown. Not so much in a brown. But can have some in a Flanders red. How about lactic sourness? In Berliner Weiss. Yeah. So you got to know when they're appropriate and when they're not. So, oxidation. Is oxidation ever appropriate? Oxidation could be paper-like and wet cardboard and bad, or it could be sherry-like in a barley wine where it's good and desired. So we'll talk more about each of those. The old recipe question, guarantee you there's going to be questions like this. They used to include these styles, and I don't know that they ever went beyond these styles. So I would definitely know how to put a recipe together for those styles, if not all styles. If you've been brewing for a while, hopefully you can rough out a recipe for just about anything. And we'll cover some general rules of thumb on how to do that. But definitely know these, because these were picked in the past, and I know on exams that I've administered and taken, these are the styles that usually showed up. One of these would show up for that question. The question was create a recipe for this style for a 5-gallon batch and be as detailed as possible. So,
And you're talking about for the national test, to go through the essay?
I'm talking about the old essay test.
Right.
That was one of the questions. So,
That would be hard
how
to
are they going to
translate into a multiple choice.
Well, not necessarily. They're just going to ask individual questions.
They could have a multiple choice, multiple answer ones where you'd have to pick the selection of
That
grains
too.
for a beer or the selection.
Yeah, what malt is appropriate for a certain style of beer? What hop variety is appropriate for a certain style of beer? What OG is appropriate? What FG? So anyway, you should know these styles. Know these styles. Know how to put a 5-gallon recipe together for these, and basically just what grains are in them, what hops you would use, and those types of things. I don't know if it'll get into percentages, ounces of hops and things like that. But if you know at least what goes in, I mean, what hop goes into a Bohemian Pilsner? Sauce, spicy sauce hops, right? These classic things that we should just know. What kind of malt do you use in a Belgian triple? We haven't gotten there yet, but I have talked about it in both my classes. I say what do we call a triple? A triple's really simple grain bill, pills and sugar. Pills and sugar. Pills, malt, and sugar. Real simple. Doppelbock. What kind of mash technique are you going to use? Concoction. Okay. What kind of malt in an Oktoberfest?
Vienna, Munich, and
Could have some.
Stop there. I'd stop there. Keep it simple. In the old way of doing the test, keep it simple. the more you added, the more complex your recipe got, the more chance of error you created. You know, with an Oktoberfest, a lot of them are made with just being in Munich. So, okay, the old additional possible questions: troubleshooting. Explain how the brewer gets the following characteristics in his or her beer: good head retention, clarity in a beer, proper diacetyl level. What are body and mouth feel? Explain those. These were some of the random questions that got scattered in, but so you should know all these. Discuss hops. Describe their characteristics. Just explain the malting process. Describe the role of yeast. Describe the stages of yeast development. Discuss the importance of water and the brewing process. What is krausening? How does it affect the beer? What is adding gypsum do? Finings. What's hot break and cold break? When do they happen? What do they do? Explain the role of diastatic and proteolytic enzymes in the brewing process. 5 primary purposes for boiling wort. That used to be a staple question. It was on every exam, so you should probably know at least 5 reasons for boiling the wort. We're going to cover all this stuff, by the way. Just take a little while to get there. But then you still got to study it. We're going to cover it quickly, and then you got to study it. First tech topic, water. Any of these things, again, all of you have been through either my beer MBA class or you've been through my PY class. You covered a lot of this stuff, just maybe not at deep levels. We're not going to cover it at a super deep level in this class because this is stuff you can read. I'm going to tell you what you need to know and cover the high points. Then you're going to need to study that stuff. So get the highlighter out, start circling stuff, or if you don't have your own handout, jot notes on a side sheet of paper or something. Okay. But as I said, the things that you can study on your own, we don't need to spend a tremendous amount of time with. You just need to know that you need to know it. And then the things that we have to do here is get lots of judging practice in. So you got to get to that. So water in the brewing process. Water makes up about 90% of the finished product. Key ions: calcium, magnesium, bicarbonate, sulfate, chloride, sodium. You should know what each of those does for the beer. Know the chemical term for each one of those. Know what total dissolved solids is. When we talk about soft and hard water, I've quizzed everybody on this before. Does a water softener create soft water? No, it does not. It's an ion exchange system. It strips out calcium and magnesium, which we need for the brewing process, and replaces it with sodium and chloride, salt, unless you have a potassium softener like the big Carl does. But no, a water softener does not soften water. It replaces certain ions with other ions that feel softer to the touch, but the actual total dissolved solids, the TDS, is still the same. So you haven't changed that. So you still have a high mineral content water that sometimes, like around here, you can adjust your pH to get your mash where you want it, get it down to 5.2, but if you didn't knock out some of those solids, you still got a really minerally based water. So if you're making a pale, like a soft, subtle Scottish or a small English ale or something like that, you got this really minerally water, it's really going to rear its head and affect the quality of the beer. So there's 2 things you really have to worry about with water, and that's getting the right ion content and the right total dissolved solids content. Right? So we want to, usually in Indiana, we want to strip out a lot of those solids and get it to a more average level. I'll show you a chart here in just a second. Hardness, a lot of times alkalinity is considered a measure of hardness, but they actually are different. And that alkalinity / hardness measurement is sometimes measured by bicarbonate, HCO3. So if you look at that category in your water profile report, that gives you an idea of the alkalinity of the water. The pH scale that we have right here, I've talked about this before, but you should really know it now. 7 is neutral, 0 is your acidic side, 14 is your basic side or your alkaline side. What's our water around here in Indiana? 7, 4, something like that, right? What's our mash pH gonna work best at? 5.2, right? So if our natural water is up here at 7 something, and our mash efficiency is gonna be best at 5 something, we have to take pH that way, which means to acidify it, because you're going towards the acidic side of the scale, right? So we need to acidify that water and get it down there. Around here, if we're making porters and stouts, the acids in the dark malts are naturally going to do that for us. Our water is very similar to Dublin in that respect, and when we add those dark malts, the acids in those dark malts will take us right down to 5.2 type range. It works perfectly around here. But what if we're making a pale beer that doesn't have those things, those dark malts in it? And now we've got to find another way to acidify that water, that mash water, and the mash itself. And that's usually where we get into lactic acid solutions. Calcium. You should know what each of these is. You should know what the ideal parts per million should be for each of these key ions. There's only 6 of them, so there's not that much to know. But for calcium, you want 50 to 100 parts per million. That's the general range, right? There's a bullet list of things here that you can study. The more you know, the better. But at least know the average parts per million. Know that it's important. Know that calcium and magnesium are important for the mash. Stimulates enzyme activity, helps gelatinize starches, improves lautering, etc. Magnesium. Magnesium. Milk of magnesium. What's that do for you? Milk of magnesium. Isn't that a laxative?
Helps.
So in high quantities, magnesium can be a laxative. You probably don't need to know that though. I'll just throw that in there. 10 to 30 parts per million, could go as high as 50 to 60 parts per million with a lot of high hop bitterness. High levels, it does, actually you may need to know that, you never know. At high levels, it does create some astringency. You ever tasted milk of magnesium? Man, it's chalky. Chalky. Really astringent. Really dries the mouth out. Okay? Think of that. Think of milk of magnesium being chalky, drying the mouth out, creates astringency at high levels. Bicarbonate neutralizes the acids from dark malts, smooths the astringency. Less than 50 parts per million. Less than 50 parts per million. Sodium creates a salty or sour flavor, which can be inappropriate. 170 to 150 parts per million. Sulfate. Sulfate does one really important thing. It accentuates hop bitterness. If you know one thing about sulfate, know that it accentuates hop bitterness. Okay? Just think about it. Sulfate. You got one that accentuates bitterness, sulfate. You got another ion, chloride, that accentuates sweetness. Okay? So, if you know one does sweet and one does bitter, then you just got to try to remember which the two are. And think of sulfur. sulfur, I don't know. It's kind of pungent, it's strong. Somehow correlate that to bitterness in your brain. Okay, sulfate, bitterness. Chloride, you want less than 200 parts per million and accentuates sweetness. Chloride. Think about this little anecdote. You ever seen, my dad used to do it occasionally, and I used to see a lot of people his age do it. They'd sit in the bar, they'd get a basic American lager, they'd put a little salt in it. Are they trying to make the beer salty? No. But a little bit of salt actually makes it sweet. It's only when you go over that threshold that it actually becomes salty. Do you know how much salt is in ice cream? It's a lot of salt in ice cream. You never think about that. Ice cream's sweet. So at lower levels, salt, which is sodium chloride, so chloride, right? So chloride accentuates sweetness. Sulfates accentuate bitterness. Other ions, sulfur. This, like if you're getting into well water or something and you've got a high sulfur content in it, sulfur is going to smell like rotten eggs, burning matches, that sort of thing. Iron, like well water with a lot of iron in it, it's going to taste blood-like. What does, if you ever had a scratch or if you've been bleeding, or the next time you get one, taste your blood. Blood tastes like iron. It just does. So that's why we say blood-like or metallic. Chlorine or chloramines. These are like chlorine. Tastes like a swimming pool. So if you got a beer that has a swimming pool character, probably didn't get the chlorine out of it. Let's see, demineralization, so you can precipitate it out, you can use membrane filtration, you can distill it out, you can dilution method, all those different types of things to get the total dissolved solids out of the beer. Salt additions to adjust brewing water. Usually these ions are not added by themselves. They're usually added as a combination, like calcium sulfate, which is gypsum. I'm on page 11. Does everyone see that? Know that calcium sulfate is gypsum. Magnesium sulfate is Epsom salts. Sodium chloride is table salt. Calcium carbonate, chalk. Sodium bicarbonate, baking soda. It's good to know whether they raise or lower the pH. The way they raise or lower the pH, we won't get too deep into this, but on page 13 is John Palmer's alkalinity guide and nomograph, I think he calls this, to where you can use it to figure out how much of a certain ion to add to raise or lower the pH to where you want it based on the color of your beer. Okay, not the best system in the world, but it does work. It does work in general. I'm not going to cover it right now because on the written test, maybe you got into this a little more. I don't think we can get into this kind of complicated stuff on the online exam. So if you want to read about that, feel free to. Dropping the pH. Lactic and phosphoric acids. You can also use sulfuric acid or hydrochloric acid. Lactic acid is the one that kind of has the least amount of flavor and is the easiest to work with. But there are people who use the others, so just know that you can do that. Page 14, some of the classic water profiles of the world. Know that Pilsen is extremely soft, very low parts per million of everything. Know that Dublin, home of stouts, has really high alkaline water, very similar to what we have, so a really high HCO3 or really high bicarbonate. Know that Burton-on-Trent, look at Burton-on-Trent's sulfate, SO4. Look at that, 450 to 820. How are you going to make a sweet beer with sulfates that high in your water when you don't know anything about ions, right? It's back in the early days when they're trying to figure out what kind of beer they make best. They figured out that they make good bitters because you couldn't really make anything else with sulfate that high. So those are some of the key things. So the high alkalinity of Dublin, the high sulfate of Burton-on-Trent, the super softness of Pilsen. Those are some key ones to know. On the next page, page 15, those are your famous cities. Those are your beers, and a little description of those beers and why they come from that city. We've already talked about that a little bit, so we will move on. Page 16, if everything we just talked about is making your head hurt, here's a little review page. Okay? The more you know, the better off you will be. But if you can't know it all, at least know the review page. At least know the review page. This covers some of the key things that we just talked about. Try to know more than that if you can. Malting. I'm going to send out some links that I use in my IUPY class. There's some kind of cool videos on malting that I show. There used to be a whole question on malting. I saw it on an exam twice. That's something you may not think of. Malting. It's like, what? That's already done before we get it. So why do we have to know that? Well, you do. There's a lot of things happen in the malting process that creates the flavors in the malt. So basically know that, let's see, some key things. Malting's the first step in this process of starting to convert the starches in the seed into sugars. That's ultimately what we're doing. We have a seed. Barley is a seed. And we're trying to convert the starches in that into sugars and then extract those sugars to make our beer with. Okay? So I think there's some issues with trying to bring raw barley in from the field and just storing it right away. It needs to sort of be stabilized, and it needs to be taken through at least the first stage of the malting process. Ultimately, the brewer's going to do that saccharification rest, and we're going to do the actual final step of converting, the full conversion of those starches into sugars, but the maltster gets that process started. They get that started. And you'll see in these videos that I'll show you. The videos are actually from Highland Park Whiskey, Scotch. Scotch fan, you know that, yeah. Neat series of videos. The guy's got a great accent, explains it all in a bunch of little snippets. And he says, before we can make Scotch, we have to make beer. We have to make beer before we can make Scotch. We make a big beer. That's how he talks. So, and they do. That's basically what they do. They make a big beer. They make an 8 or 9% beer out of a single malt, and then they distill that to pull the alcohol out of that beer, and that's Scotch. Okay. So they bring it in from the field and put it in steeps, and they put it in the steeps. The malting process begins by steeping the raw barley grain 55 to 65 degree water for 2 to 3 days. I remember getting dinged because I didn't put how many days in the exact temperature. That was a tough grader though, I think. So I don't think you need to know that. I think if you just need to know it's warm water for a couple days. That starts the process. Next they take the wet grain out, and they place it in the old days they did floor malting. Today it's a big conveyor system, but basically they keep it warm and moist. They keep turning it so it doesn't get too hot in one place. the video shows this old technique of floor malting and the different ways they do that, which is really cool. Today it's all done by machines and on conveyor. But if you keep that seed warm and moist, it thinks it's in the ground and it starts to sprout. So little rootlets start to come off of it, right? So these little white rootlets start to stick out of the seed. At that point, they tumble it, skipping down to step 10 on page 18. A lot of other stuff in there, really technical. Honestly, don't think you need to know it, but if you just want to know it, please read it. But it gets pretty technical, talking about the acrospire and how it's growing and what's fully modified and what's not fully modified. You know, when that acrospire gets to, you know, this range, when it grows up to this range of the seed, then it's fully modified. And most of the malt we buy today is fully modified, meaning we only have to take it that next step. It's basically been through, you know, and like that acid rest and protein rest sort of stuff, and it's now ready to just go straight into make sugar, fully modified malts. So you can read all that if you wish. Step 10 is these rootlets are there, it starts drying, and you tumble it to knock off the little rootlets, and the amount of enzymes present in the malt that convert starches into sugar is now referred to diastatic power. Page 18, bottom of page 18, know what diastatic power is. That's the power of that particular malt. Every malt has a different diastatic power, but you want malt with good diastatic power because that's what's going to convert those starches into sugars. What if you're using corn? What if you're a big brewer or you're a home brewer making a light lager and you're using some corn in there? Corn has very little diastatic power. It relies on the barley and the diastatic power of the barley. So you want barley with a really high diastatic power, so it can not only convert its own starches into sugars, but it can convert the corn starches into sugars. Okay, so diastatic power, important term to know. So then after we've done that, and again you can read all this in more detail, but after we've done that, now we've knocked the rootlets off, now we take it through various different types of drying processes, kilning processes, roasting processes to make those hundreds of varieties of malts that there are out there. I would say for this test, you need to know the basics. There's two ways of looking at this. Page 20 is just another perspective on malting that I kind of pulled from John Palmer's book with his permission. Just another explanation of the malting process. But let's get to page 22. Base malts. Base malts need to be mashed. Lager malts, pale malt, these are measured in Lovibond. Lovibond is the L, the capital L, that tells you what color that grain, that malt will create in the beer. So a 2 Lovibond is really, really light. Okay, really, really light. So lager malt, pale malt, wheat malt, rye malt. Kiln malts still need to be mashed. Biscuit, Victory, Munich, Vienna. Some of these you can use as base malts, 100%. You can use 100% Munich and make beer, right? Munich Dunkel. You can add little bits and pieces of them to create biscuity notes. Add color. You know, Victory is known for its orange highlights that it adds to the beer. So know those things. Caramel malts. Caramel malts. What's unique about caramel malts? One extremely unique thing about caramel malts. They don't have to be mashed. They are mashed in the kernel. They are mashed in the kernel. The sugars are already created. That's why when homebrewers are doing extract beers and they just want to add a little fresh malt character, a little caramel, You can just steep those. You can crack them and steep them like making tea on the stove and pour it through a strainer and add the liquid to your wort. Doesn't have to go through a mashing process. All you're trying to do is extract the sugar. Okay? So crystal malts or caramel malts, they're the same thing. Don't get confused on that. Crystal malt, caramel malt, same thing. They're in different level bonds. 10, 40, 60, they get a little darker as they go up. Caramel malts are traditionally English. English. Rarely use caramel malts in Germany. Rarely. ESBs, English beers, caramel's very popular. Special B, that's a unique malt that everyone should know because of the fruitiness that it has. Plum-like character, really complex, special B. Roasted malts, 3 of them. Chocolate, black, and roasted barley. That's actually a misnomer. What's the issue with roasted barley? It's not a malt. It's not a malt. Roasted barley is more like a coffee bean. It is just barley that has been roasted. It has not been through the malting process. So there's you've killed off all the starches in there. Black or roasted barley is just adding that coffee-like charcoal-y character to the beer, used sparingly. Chocolate malt adds that baker's cocoa type character. Roasted barley is known for coffee-like character in stouts. Black patent is known more for its charcoal or burnt character. Various other grains and adjuncts. Flaked barley. When would you use flaked barley? Well, I guess, yeah, I was going to say if you just wanted to add cloudiness and head retention. Some people add a little flaked barley in almost all their beers to give them more head. But you definitely want them in stouts and things like that to really get you that big, thick, creamy head. Flaked barley is good for that. Flaked corn, oatmeal, various uses for all of these things. Again, if you've brewed with them, you know that. What's unique about rye and wheat? Something really unique about rye and wheat. That's different from barley.
They don't have a husk.
They don't have a husk. So if you're making beer with rye or wheat, that's why you have to use rice hulls. Rice hulls is just like a fibrous material. Takes the place of the cracked husk that you would have if you were making beer with barley. There's a lot to know about malting and the grains. That section there, it was done 2 different ways. So if you read the first part, then you read that alternate version. It's just 2 different ways. It came from 2 different sources. Nice to read them both. Again, if it explodes your head, at least know the review page. We have some off flavors to do here. Light body, that can come from a lot of places, but oftentimes it comes from the mash. If your body is too light or too heavy, then for the style. A Ronism that I have in there at the end of that section is hot body. Hot body, hot body. Think of hot body for the mash. The hotter it is, the more body you're going to have. Hot body. Very simple, right? The higher temperatures in your mashes, you're creating unfermentable sugars. So those sugars are going to be residual. They're going to stay in the beer. They're going to create more body. Hot body. Vice versa, of course, the other way. But if you know one, you know the other. So the lighter, the lower temperatures, when you want a really dry beer that's going to be really fermented out, like a lot of the Belgian beers, they want those to be really, really dry. It's a characteristic of the style, to be super dry, digestible, they call it. they have mash temps at 145 degrees, which is a lot lower than most people even think of going, but the Belgians do that. So at 145, you're making these really formidable sugars, and it's going to create a really dry, light beer. Okay. DMS, dimethyl sulfide. Biggest misconception on dimethyl sulfide is that because it tastes like corn, is that it comes from corn. It does not come from corn. You can have DMS in a Pilsner that uses all Pils malt, right? The key is S-methylmethionine. 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 That is the precursor to DMS. That is the precursor to dimethyl sulfide. That is present in grains, and it's more present in lighter based malts. So Pils malt has a lot of this precursor for DMS in it. It comes out when it gets heated. So as soon as you get up around 180 degrees, that S-methylmethionine starts turning into dimethyl sulfide, DMS. So as long as you have a good rolling boil, it's venting off. As it's being created, it's going away. What's left in the beer, if you're making an ale, and you have big vigorous fermentation, the rest of that DMS is going off with the CO2. But if you brew with the lid on, all that steam is hitting the top of the lid, condensing, and dropping right back into your beer. So all that corn flavor is not going away. What if you cool too slowly? You don't have a good work chiller, and it sits for hours at 100 and some degrees. It's not hot enough that it's boiling, so it's not escaping, but it's still being created at that temperature, but it can't go anywhere. So you're just creating all this DMS that's stuck in the beer. Same thing then with some lagers. You don't have a big vigorous fermentation, and if you have some leftover DMS still in the beer, and you don't have a big vigorous fermentation to scrub it off, it's going to get stuck in the beer. So several places where DMS and rear its ugly head. Is it appropriate? Absolutely. Low levels of DMS are appropriate in lots of styles. We'll talk about those. Vegetal. Biggest thing here is when you are judging beers, vegetal means rotten vegetables. By God, you will know when you have a vegetal beer. You just will. When you go, wow, that smells like rotten broccoli, you have a vegetal beer on your hands. Okay? If it's heading in that direction, you will know you have a vegetal beer on your hands. If it just tastes like plant and smells like plant, that's probably hops. I say this all the time, and I catch judges doing this all the time. It's like, oh, I'm getting something vegetal in there. Yeah, it's probably that green plant we put in there. It's not bad. It's not like rotten broccoli. It's probably hops. Okay? So just keep that in mind. If it's bad and kind of disgusting and just really not pleasant, it's heading towards vegetal. Yes, bacterial type contamination or a very intense level of DMS can create that. But if it just tastes kind of plant-like, you gotta assume that's hops. Okay. Light strike, we all know what that is. Skunky. UV light comes into contact with the isohumulone molecules, cuts it in half, turns it into a sulfur compound, smells like skunk. Sweet versus malty, just a little thing that I like to cover. We'll talk more about it later, but just realize that a lot of judges will interchange malty and sweet, and I understand that because a lot of times when the malt is where the sugar comes from, so that is where the sweet part of the beer comes from. But sweet should be saved for describing a beer like you would a wine. Sweet should be the finish of a beer. If you say the beer is sweet, it's how does it finish? Okay, finishes dry or finishes sweet, semi-sweet, more like a wine. When you talk about malty, malty isn't necessarily sugar. You can have sugary sweet, in a beer, but most of the time, malty is more of a flavor profile of the grain itself. Toasty, roasty, biscuity, grainy, cereally, oaty, caramel. You know what I mean? When you describe malt, put those types of adjectives with it. You don't just associate sweet and malt together. Because you can have toasty, nutty, toffee, all kinds of malt flavors without it being sweet. A beer can be very malty and not be sweet. Right? Doppelbock. A Doppelbock should not finish cloyingly sweet. It should finish on the drier side, but yet there's tons of malt character in there, right? Tons of malt flavor. Keep that in mind.
When you talk about nutty,
Yeah. Nutty.
frame that for me, because I hear people describe it all the time, and I never taste it.
It's kind of like grape nut cereal or something. There's just you ever eat nuts?
Yeah.
Not peanuts necessarily, but more almonds and things like that. There's just I guess I don't know how to describe it any more than it's got a nutty character. Brown malts create some nuttiness. Biscuit malt, along with that biscuity flavor, can sometimes be a little nutty. And it's not like peanuts, but it's more like a dry, maybe more bland, cereally type nut, like an almond or something. That's
Grape nuts, though.
Grape nuts is a
When
good
you
way
say
to
that,
think about it. Grape nuts. Oxidized. I've done this to people in the past. Take the edge of your paper and fold it over like that. Just fold it over.
I gotta make us lick it.
Yep. And lick that sucker. I'm serious. Do it. That is oxidation, man.
I can taste that in your mouth.
That bland, fibrous, blah flavor is what oxidation tastes like. That's what it does to your beer. That's why it gets described as paper-like or wet cardboard. We don't often lick wet cardboard or paper, but when you do, like you just did, that bland flavor is oxidation. So that's the bad oxidation, usually caused by the beer getting old. Heat, rapid heating and chilling accentuates it and makes it go faster, makes it oxidize faster. Good oxidation would be the sherry-like flavors of melanoidins, specifically. Melanoidins, those caramel, those rich, complex flavor components called melanoidins that we'll talk about in the box. When those things oxidize, they get cherry notes. Phenolic is a bad phenol, tastes like Band-Aids or Listerine, and usually comes from wild yeast or other types of bacterial contamination. You know it when you got it. Judging process, guys, I'm not going to cover that. I'm going to let you read that on your own. There's just too much stuff there, but if you start on page 28, this is cut and pasted out of the document on the BJCP website. Those of you that have stewarded, those of you that have judged any already, you're going to know a lot of this stuff already. But just make sure you understand who can do what, what's the organizer's role, what's the competition director's role, what's a steward's role, what's a head judge's role, who's responsible for filling out cover sheets, all that kind of stuff. read through this, and then at the end of this, a whole bunch of bullet notes. And then at the end of it, there are all of the questions that we used to be asked, and I guarantee you these are the same questions. Well, I can't guarantee it, but I'm pretty darn sure these would be the same questions that would be scattered throughout the online exam. They're true-false questions. This is the whole pool of them. And they have the answers with them. So, you know, if you just want to read through the questions, make sure you know these. Simple points. Make sure you know them. Once you've read through them a couple times, they're pretty common sense. Okay.
That's right.
Now, you have a score sheet in front of you. How many people have never judged a beer before and used a score sheet? Most of you. Okay, that's what I expected. So we're gonna walk through this first beer together. Let's see. Does everyone have their style guidelines out in front of them? It's better to have it printed out, guys. When I was first learning, I found it really helpful to just use a highlighter or a red pen or something and go in and highlight and identify some of the key things. Have a master sheet that's yours. You're going to carry this binder around. You're going to take it to your first few competitions at least, and it's going to have your notes in it. It's going to have things highlighted that you highlighted to help you remember that beer. All right. One of the first things I do when I'm getting ready to judge a beer, first off, you don't taste it. You got to rely on our nose for a lot to begin with. We spend a lot of time before we ever taste the beer. But I glance down, if I'm not familiar with the style, or even just to remind myself, a light American lager. What are some of the commercial examples of a light American lager? Miller Lite, Bud Light, Coors Light. Some of the better ones might be Bitburger Light, Sam Adams Light. But basically, those are those light beers, right? So now I'm thinking, okay, I've tasted those beers. I know what they taste like. I'm kind of getting that in my brain for what to expect. Know that no one beer defines a style. That's very important. No one beer defines a style. Every style is a range. But still think back to some of those beers and plan it in your brain and go, okay, calibrate, that's what I'm getting ready to taste, is like a Miller Lite, Bud Light type of beer. Okay, so it better be thin, better be almost watery, better not have a lot of flavor, blah, blah, blah. Then I hit some of the key things. Look at some of the parameters on it. ABV, how big is this beer? So this beer should be 3 to 4%. Okay, 3 to 4%. So talking about a small beer. Color, 2 to 3. We're talking a really light beer. 8 to 12 IBUs. 10 IBUs is barely perceptible. We've covered that in other classes. IBUs 0 to 100. 10 is barely perceptible. You're going to feel it way back there in the back of your throat. 10 IBUs, barely perceptible, just enough to dry out that back part of your throat. Then I may look at, depending on the style and what maybe I have highlighted on it, I might look at those things. It might be ingredients where I remember, oh yeah, this one has up to 40% corn, up to 40% corn in an American Light Lager. I might look at the aroma and try to remember whether it's got DMS or not, right? So those are some of the key things I want to know about the beer. Now we're ready to judge it. Now we've got a frame of reference. I know some of the key parameters of the beer. I know the commercial example of the style I'm getting ready to try. I'm sort of ready in my brain to now dive into this particular style. So, aroma. Little to no malt aroma. Malt aroma is the rich part of it. That sweetness, that toastiness, that graininess, that, cereal character. Little to no malt aroma, although it can be grainy, sweet, or corn-like if present. Hop aroma may range from none to light, spicy or floral hop presence. Low levels of yeast character, green apples, acetaldehyde. DMS or fruitiness, low levels are acceptable. Optional, but acceptable. No diacetyl, which is our buttery flavor, right? So when we smell a beer, it's sometimes good to kind of swirl it like this, because when we swirl it like that, it rouses the carbonation. And the carbonation getting roused like that starts releasing stuff so we can smell it better. There's a couple techniques for smelling the beer. A lot of people today prefer the bloodhound technique. I never learned that way, so I don't do that, but the bloodhound technique is, right? Like a dog. The other one's just a big, long draw. So I kind of do a little combination of the two. But you'll see, if you do that type of bloodhound technique, you will really get some good aroma going up in there. What do we smell? Sweet. I smell a little sweet. I smell a little graininess. I smell a little cerealiness. Hint of green apple. I buy that. Real faint, but there's a faint yeast character in there. Not a whole lot of DMS. Bready, yeah. All right, so we got to write that. We got to explain that on our sheet. So if we comment on the sheet that you have there in front of you, if you comment on the malt, and you comment on the hops, and you comment on the esters, whether they're there or not, and then anything else that you might pick up. And as you're doing that, describe whether it's appropriate or not. You know, what level is the malt, and what does it smell like? So if I'm picking up a low or moderate, grainy sweetness, describe that. Whatever you're getting, describe it. Start writing. Describe the malt. Describe the hops. If you're not getting any hop aroma, then say that.
Just want us to describe between low and high, that kind of scale.
Everyone develops their own technique on this, but yes, if you can describe what you're smelling and at what intensity, and whether it's appropriate or not, that's very comprehensive. A lot of people don't put whether it's appropriate or not, they just put what they are getting. But I think it's better for brewers when they get their sheets back to know, well, you described this, this, and this, but was that appropriate or not? I don't understand. So describe that aroma and then give it a score out of 12. When I look at the score, well, what about esters? Are there esters? Fruity esters? Or is it clean? I get a little, as he picked up, I do get a little like acetaldehyde fruitiness, but I'm not really getting a ale-like fruitiness. I think it's clean. But you need to describe that. Even if it's a lager, whether it's a lager or an ale, describe what kind of esters, what level, and if you can pick anything specific out of it, then describe that. You know, is it pear or something, or you might just say low fruity esters if it has it, or no esters, clean. And then when it comes to the score, out of 12, I look at it, and everyone develops their own system for this, but I look at it as well, 6 or 7 is going to be like average, right? So if it's sort of an average beer for the style, and it's kind of right in that middle road, nothing really stands out. You know, it's just sort of okay, it sort of meets the guidelines, but it could be a little better, then it's average. You know, so you'd be in a 6 or 7 range. If it's perfect, which no beer is, it would be 12, but no beer is perfect. So highest you might go is maybe 10, maybe 11 if it was really ideal. So if it's sort of in between average and perfect, you're 8, 9, 7, 8, 9, 10 range. This you develop over time. Over time you develop an internal scale. You can't teach it, you just gotta practice. So there's your aroma. You have a score. Now let's go to appearance. Appearance, very pale straw to pale yellow color, white frothy head that seldom persists, and very clear. Now, this got poured from a pitcher and it's been sitting for a while. It had a little bit better head on there. It's definitely white and frothy. It's brilliantly clear. It's in the right color range. So this is one of those that's pretty easy to knock out because you just go in and describe the color, the clarity, the head, and its retention level. So I would say, something like light gold or straw, a little deeper than straw actually is. I'd call that more of a light gold color. So light gold color, white head, appropriate head level and retention, something like that. If you agree that it is. If you don't, then you start digging. It's only 3 points. It's only 3 points. So this is a place where sometimes even a really bad beer can score all 3 points because it can look perfect. Right? Sometimes it doesn't though. So this is a category where I often give 3 points. If everything looks, in range on it, so be it. It gets 3 points. But if something's kind of way off, like if this beer was cloudy and it's supposed to be brilliantly clear, you got to deduct a point. That's a trademark of the style. It's brilliant clarity. If it was flat and it had no head at all, just poured out of the bottle flat, you got to ding it for that. But you only got 3 points to work with. So write all that stuff down. That's your appearance. Flavor, got 20 points to work with, same type of thing. 10, 11 is sort of average. 16, 17 is a really high score on flavor. Again, you always want to leave yourself room for a better beer in the flight. You hardly ever want to go all the way up to the maximum on a beer unless it's just blowing your socks off. So a good beer is probably going to be in between that average range and the high teens. So let's talk about it. Crisp and dry flavor. Before you taste it, crisp and dry flavor with some low levels of grainy or corn-like sweetness. Hop flavor ranges from none to low. Hop bitterness at low level. Balance may vary from slightly malty to slightly bitter, but is relatively close to even. High levels of carbonation may provide a slight acidity or a dry sting. No diacetyl, no fruitiness. Alright, so when we taste this, you want to drink a little bit, you want to take a little bit in your mouth, and you kind of want to gently wash that all around your palate. Okay, all around your palate, because we taste things in different parts. Make sure it goes all around your palate. And then as you swallow, keep your mouth closed, exhale through your nose. That exhale through your nose is going to allow you to pick up all kinds of little nuanced things in there that you wouldn't get otherwise. Okay? Try to remember to do that. Let's have a little taste. One of the things that I do often, because I want to spend more time on flavor, is that with my first impression, also sometimes that first drink, you don't have a full impression of the flavor because just tasted for the first time. Maybe take another sip. But what you can get with that first sip is you can identify the mouthfeel. characteristics. So I personally usually jump from appearance. When I take that first drink, I jump to mouthfeel and just sort of let that flavor and stuff sit there while I evaluate the mouthfeel. The mouthfeel on this one should be very light body, with the use of a high percentage of adjuncts such as rice or corn, which help create that really light body. Very highly fermentable sugars. Very high carbonation with a slight carbonic bite on the tongue. That little sizzle, right, from that real high carbonation, like when you drink a Pepsi or something. It goes, right, that carbonic bite. And may seem watery, so very light body, may seem watery, very high carbonation. So with that first drink, we can sort of assess all of that. My personal assessment is that this beer is a little heavy on the body for a light, for American light lager. Light lagers are really light. They are very watery.
So
This has a bit more body than that. Yes,
If
it's
we were
still
like-
light, but it's sort of in that light to heading to medium range. I think the body's a little heavy on this beer. I get a lot of residual sweetness. I don't get a high carbonation on it, and I'm not getting that really crisp, dry pop that I'm expecting from this beer. That could be because it's a little warmer right now, so I'll take that into consideration. But out of those 5 points, again, it's only 5 points, so describe the body, level of body. So is it very light, is it medium, is it moderate? Describe the level of carbonation. Is there any alcoholic warmth if appropriate? Is it creamy? Is there an astringency? That's that whole mouth dryness we've talked about. And then give it, out of 5 points. So I personally would deem this one a little bit because I'm not getting the carbonation level that I expect, crisp, dry finish, or the lightness of the body. Okay, so after we've done that, now let's jump back to flavor. Because now we got that 20 points to work with, and we're pretty much done once we do that, because the overall is much easier now. We'll figure that out pretty quickly. So we've had that first drink, we analyzed our mouthfeel, gave us time for that first sip to kind of lay there on the tongue for a little bit. Now let's go back and swirl it all around, keep your mouth closed, exhale through your nose, and describe that flavor. Crisp and dry flavor with some low levels of grainy or corn-like sweetness. Hop flavor ranges from none to low. Hop bitterness low. Balance may vary from slightly malty to slightly bitter, but is relatively close to even. High levels of carbonation may provide a slight acidity. So, I'm not getting the crisp dryness. Again, not getting that carbonation level. And maybe getting a little too much rich, grainy pills or pale malt type flavor than I expect in a light lager. So I describe all that. Also talk about esters. Here you want to talk about what does the malt taste like, what do the hops taste like. I get a real low level hop, herbal type hop character in this, but it's pretty low. Any fermentation characteristics, its balance, its finish. Does it finish dry? Does it finish sweet? How does it finish? And then anything else, and then try to come up with a score. Graders want you to write a lot. They don't want to see white space. They want to see those sheets filled up. And it has to be legible. That can be difficult sometimes. But if you can't read it, it's not going to grade real well. After you judge the flavor, then let's look at that overall impression. The overall impression is not just a place to summarize what you said previously, but really the overall impression is a place to make suggestions of how to make the beer better. Okay? So anything that you identified anywhere else on the score sheet that was a negative, you should readdress and talk about how to make it a positive, how to make that part better. So if that carbonation was low, you need to increase the carbonation level. If the body was a little too heavy, then we need to, lighten up the beer a little bit, either through recipe formulation or mashing temperatures perhaps. If it's an all grain beer, we don't know that. Could be an extract beer. So never make assumptions. But if it's an all grain beer, maybe they could get a lighter body through mashing at lower temperatures.
Do you want to
Or you could
suggest that?
you could just say recipe formulation. It may be the malts that are used. So yeah, those are the types of things you need to say. You're giving the brewer feedback of you've told them what's wrong with the beer, and now you have to tell them how to fix it.
But we don't know anything about their process, or, like, I don't want to make any assumptions.
Don't make
like,
assumptions.
You're an all-grain brewer, so
If-
change your mash
So
temperature.
if an all grain,
Yeah.
if this is an all grain beer, then maybe lower mash temps would help give you a lighter body. Okay.
Alright.
Otherwise, it may be recipe formulation. What else would make a lighter body in this style of beer?
Less grain.
Higher percentage of corn, right?
More fermented.
So more fermentables, higher percentage of corn,
Use a different yeast that would attenuate further.
possibly. Yeah. So, on the exam, you want to explain as much as you possibly can. If you got 15 minutes per beer, you better be writing for 15 minutes, okay? And saying all kinds of good stuff to help make that beer better. In a real world situation, you're not going to get that detailed. In a real competition, you're just going to say, needs a lighter body. If there's something that really stands out that you think it needs to give it that lighter body, then you can say that. But otherwise, just saying that it needs a lighter body is adequate for a competition. But on the exam, handle it differently. On the exam, you want to address it. You want that grader to know that you know inside and out all the different ways to lighten the body on this beer. Use your 15 minutes wisely. And then same with the score. 5 or 6 would be sort of an average. 9 would be stellar. Again, probably never want to go to that highest point. And somewhere in between average and stellar might be a 7 or an 8. So you give it something like that and come up with a score.
Now, overall, how do you weigh how much you eat? Is it strictly according to style?
According to style, yes, yeah. This is usually where I reiterate multiple times. This still has nothing to do with personal preference. It still has nothing to do with personal preference. It's still an overall impression of this beer as that style. Sometimes you might even put in there, may judge better as a blank. Would this beer judge better as something else? Maybe a standard or a premium. It's got all the right characteristics, just seems a little,
Out of balance.
just seems like it's got a little too much malt character it's not as thin and light and watery as a light American lager, but it's certainly got all the characteristics of an American lager, just maybe more of a standard or a premium. So then you come up with a score, tally up your score, and then once you have that score tallied up, make sure you do your math properly. Look over at this scale over here. Outstanding, excellent, very good, good, fair, problematic. Outstanding means a world-class example of the style, 45 to 50. 38 to 44 exemplifies the style well, but requires minor fine-tuning. 30 to 37, generally within style parameters, but some minor flaws. 21 to 29 misses the mark on style and or minor flaws. 14 to 20, off flavors, aromas, or major style deficiencies. And 0 to 13, major off flavors and aromas dominate. So I'm going to read it again. So after you come up with that score, take that score and put it over on that scale and say, how did I do? How did I do? Do I agree with myself? When I added up my scores, I came up with this. And when I take that score over to the scale, do I go, yeah, that's exactly where it should be? Then you're happy with yourself. If you take it over to that scale, and the scale says outstanding, and you didn't really think it was, and then you need to adjust your score a little bit if you're too low or too high. Then you kind of go back and say, why did I come up with that? And then, you just got to rationalize this in your head and say, oh, I see what I did. I'll have to live with that. I think that's appropriate. Or, no, I think maybe in hindsight I was too high or too low there. And go back and adjust it a little bit. Make sure you can agree with yourself that your score and the chart matches up pretty well. Okay? So, whatever I get. 39?
39.
34?
24.
24?
37.
37?
36.
29.
25.
37.
34.
Man, you guys got some talking to do.
25 to 39.
25 to 39. We want to get within 5. They say to get within 7, but I think good judges should be able to get within 5. So, if we were in a competition setting, you'd have some talking to do. You would do this whole thing by yourself, playing poker face, right? No, I like that. That's cueing other people in. Usually, when you hear someone go, oh, what's that? Or, and then they look up around, they're insecure as a judge. When you're secure as a judge, you just keep your mouth shut and you do your job. Okay? And then at the end, you show your cards, like playing poker, call, and here's what I got. That's a good, unbiased evaluation of the beer by everybody at the table. You got someone at the table going, or yuck, or what is that in there? They're biasing people now, or they're trying to figure out if they're on the right track or not before they judge the whole beer and then realize they were off in left field. Right? So don't do that. Just judge the beer on your own. That's how you're going to learn. So judge the beer on your own, come up with your score, show your cards. At this point, you've showed your cards. You're 15 points apart. You need to be 5 apart. So this is where the discussion would normally take place. We're not ready for that yet. But we'd start talking about it at this point and say, well, why do you score it so high? Why do you score it so low? And people would come to some meeting of the minds and say, okay, I can come up. You can come down a little bit. I can come up a little bit. I agree with your point on this. Okay, and I agree with your point on that. And hopefully you don't get a stalemate and you can agree so you can move on. Most people use pencil. I suggest you use pencil.
I thought it was funny that the study guide suggested only using mechanical because the wood might influence tasting.
Yeah, when you have graphite and wood laying on the table, and you start when you start doing this on a regular basis, you will get so honed in on aromas that it will start to blow your mind. You can start smelling little nuanced things that you just, it's like, wow, 2 years ago I never would have smelled that. And now there's a pencil on the table over there and you're going, I smell graphite. You just really start getting honed in on your own perceptions. So with this beer, I would have to say, looking at the chart, it's sort of in that in-between range and misses the mark on style and generally within style parameters. It's sort of right there in the middle. So the middle of those two would be like high 20s to low 30s. And, overall, it was a pretty good beer. I think I would probably have to go with maybe a 33, something like that on this beer. I think it's close, but it's it's not quite there. It's not an outstanding example of the style. It's just a little too heavy. I calibrate myself all the time. You know, I teach classes 6 times a year. I go through every one of the styles, you know, every time I do that. So I get to, unlike a lot of people, I get to taste all those samples, all those different styles all the time. It was 2 bottles of Michelob Original Lager, which is an all barley beer, going back to their like early turn of the century recipe. And Schlitz uses a low percentage of corn, and they went back to their like 1970s recipe. So there's not a lot of corn in this beer. I think that's why there's such a rich malt character in there, almost like a Munich Helles. Really, there's so much malt character in there. We spent a lot of time on that one. That whole process that we just did should take 7 minutes. One last thing. The light American lager, standard American lager, premium American lager. Basically the same beer, 3 different types of it, right? The difference in these is the amount of corn. Primarily the amount of corn. A light American lager, 40%. So remember that, 40%. Standard American lager can still be up to 40%, but normally it's a little less than that. ABV goes up a little bit. Instead of being 3.5%, it's now more of a 4.5% type beer. So it's just a little bit bigger all around, but very, very similar style. Premium American lager, up to 25% rice or corn, and some of them nowadays may not have any corn at all, like the Michelob. Okay, but that's the big difference in these. Corn creates a highly fermentable sugar that ferments out very cleanly, creates basically an alcohol water. So that's why corn thins out these beers and lightens them up. Okay. Very, just highly fermentable sugars. So, Munich Helles. Munich Helles. All barley beer, the beer of the German beer gardens. You go to German beer garden and order ein Bier. This is what you get, a Munich Helles. Look at the profile. Weihenstephan Original Lager is a classic example. Malt accentuated beer, that's something you should highlight. It's a malt accentuated beer. A Munich Helles is not about hops. It's about a wonderful, rich, sweet malt character. Pils type malt character. Pilsner malt, German, noble hops, medium body. Do this one on your own. Start writing fast, knock it out. Do it in about 7 minutes, then we'll talk about it. You have your guidelines in front of you, just take it through the steps. Aroma, bloodhound technique, appearance, jump to mouthfeel with that first sip, come back, focus on flavor. Nice technique sometimes when your nose is getting a little burned out, smell your shirt or something, just something different. Not your underarms. But that works too. But seriously, you can just kind of just smell the fabric of your shirt, and it sort of refreshes, resets the